I go harping on spark plugs again, you're probably going to hear me harp about them until I can't harp any longer. You know, I just shot, about a week ago, I shot a engine inspection video series where I talked about plugs and some of the problems you can run into, and it happened again just a few days later. So I guess repetition really is a good teacher, so I'm just going to repeat myself. Remember, there's 3 reasons why you want to inspect your spark plugs. If you don't know the history of the car, you don't know who's been working on the car, even though someone told you or you have a receipt that the plugs have been replaced, you still need to look at them. Number 1, they may be the wrong spark plug. This is very common. I'm working on this E430 here. We're changing the plugs, and it has 16 spark plugs. So I know the temptation to go with the cheap plugs, because 16 times, you know, expensive is expensive. The other reason is someone who installed the plugs may have put an inordinate amount of some sort of goo on the threads, thinking this is really good, like excessive anti-seize or some sort of grease. And that's not good, and I'll explain that here in a few moments. And then finally, they may not be torqued properly. I've seen plugs loose over and over again, particularly if they use excessive amounts of some sort of anti-seize or some sort of goo like you see on the plugs here that we just removed from this M113 engine. Let me show you what I found on these plugs. Now remember, I was getting a check engine light that showed a misfire on number 1 cylinder, so maybe we're seeing why it was misfiring. Whatever was used on these threads doesn't look like any type of anti-seize I've seen. It looks more like lithium grease, but it's just kind of oozing out the back and all over the washer. And this was on all the plugs, excessive. You can see some of the fouling on the tips. I don't know if those plugs were even firing properly, but I did find one of them that was loose, but let's talk a little bit more about what we're seeing right here as it relates to misfire. I have the new correct Bosch plugs ready to install, and I just want to talk a little bit more about this problem with putting a whole bunch of goo on the threads. I know old school is, yeah, you don't want them to seize in the heads, but the problem with these newer computer controlled cars is they have such a very high voltage spark, and it needs a super good ground. And if you have any intermittent grounding of the plug due to excessive anti-seize or lithium grease like you saw on those other plugs, that firing in that plug could break down and it will throw a check engine light. If you put too much on, it can actually work its way out into the exhaust and foul up your O2 sensor. A lot of manufacturers now are saying no anti-seize. In fact, a lot of the newer plugs have a special coating on the threads that will help to minimize seizing in the plugs. You know, I know some of you say, well, I have an engine that's high salt area, and we have problems with plugs freezing up in a block. If you do use anti-seize, put just a little bit on the threads, just a little bit. It doesn't take very much to prevent seizing, and make sure it's towards the top of the threads. So when you're changing plugs, be sure and torque them properly, and pay attention to the part number. Don't go into some auto parts store and have some counter guy who says, oh no man, we got these plugs that are every bit as good as the ones that are recommended by the manufacturer. No, 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 no. You use the manufacturer specific plugs or you're going to have troubles. Now, we're also working on a video for you, M112 and M113 engine owners. I'm going to shoot a video on changing the plugs in these engines as well as doing motor mounts, because a lot of times it's good to do those at the same time.